Owning a Viking longship costs more than most kingdoms, and somehow everyone still wanted one. Let's start with a number that should end this video immediately. Building one Viking longship took roughly 40,000 hours of labor. Not sailing it, not raiding with it, just building it. That's the same as one person working full-time, no weekends, no sick days, for about 20 years. Except nobody had 20 years, so instead you needed dozens of skilled people all working at once, which is its own special kind of expensive, because skilled people in the Viking Age didn't work for exposure and a good review. So who is you in this scenario? Because that's really what this video is about, not what a longship is. Everyone's seen the pointy boat with the dragon head, but who could actually afford to own one, and what happened to your finances the moment you said yes? Start with the wood. A single large longship, we're talking the big ones, the ones that show up in a raid and ruin someone's entire month, needed around 300 oak trees. Not 300 pieces of wood, 300 individual, fully mature oak trees, each one selected for a specific curve and grain. Because Viking shipbuilders weren't just chopping planks, they were hunting for trees that already grew in roughly the right shape for a hull rib, a keel, a stem post. That's not lumber shopping. That's forestry as a treasure hunt, and somebody has to own the forest you're hunting in. Then you need to hold all that oak together, and for that, you need iron. About 7,000 iron nails per ship, hand-forged one at a time by a blacksmith who is not doing this out of the goodness of his heart, because iron in the Viking Age wasn't cheap scrap metal. It was smelted from bog ore through a process that ate fuel, time, and labor just to produce a workable lump before anyone had even shaped it into a nail. Then the sail. This is the part everybody forgets because a sail doesn't look expensive. It's just cloth. Except a sail big enough for a serious longship needed around 2 tons of wool, which is the annual fleece output of roughly 700 sheep. 700 sheep producing wool for an entire year for one sail. And once you've got the wool, it still has to be spun, woven, and treated by skilled workers, and estimates put that at nearly a full year of labor from 2 experienced weavers working the whole time. So while the shipwrights are out swinging axes at trees looking heroic, somewhere else an equally essential, equally exhausting operation is turning livestock into the only thing that will actually move your very expensive wooden object across open ocean. Add rope, often over half a mile of it per ship, pitch to waterproof the hull, and a crew of specialized tradesmen who all need to be fed, housed, and paid while they work, and you start to see the shape of the problem. This isn't a purchase. This is standing up an entire supply chain, from forest to pasture to blacksmith's forge, and running it continuously for months, sometimes years, before the ship has done a single useful thing. So, realistically, who's paying for this? Not a farmer, not a fisherman, not some ambitious guy with a sword and a dream. You needed to already be rich, a jarl, a chieftain, eventually a king, because a longship wasn't an investment that would pay for itself later. It was proof you already had more wealth than your neighbors. Think of it less like buying a boat and more like commissioning a superyacht. Nobody asks, will this make its money back, because that was never the point. The point was that you could look at 300 oak trees, 700 sheep's worth of wool, and a small army of skilled labor and simply spend it on purpose in front of people. And this is where it gets genuinely clever, because Scandinavian rulers figured out fairly early that if only the ultra-wealthy could afford a longship, you'd never get enough of them to actually run a kingdom or fight a war. So they built a workaround, and the workaround was basically medieval crowdfunding with legal teeth, the leidang system. Regions of the coastline were divided into ship districts, and each district was collectively responsible for producing and crewing one ship for the king when called upon, pooling timber, wool, iron, and manpower from dozens of farms that individually could never afford a single plank, but together could turn out a fully crewed warship on schedule. It's less one guy buys a yacht and more an entire zip code is legally required to timeshare a naval vessel. And if your district failed to deliver, that wasn't a fine. That was a serious political problem. Okay, say you've got your ship built, waterproofed, sail attached, sitting proudly in the fjord. Congratulations, the expensive part isn't over, it just changed shape. Because a longship isn't a static object. It's a wooden hull sitting in salt water, which means it is, from the moment it launches, actively trying to fall apart. Wood swells, shrinks, and rots. Iron nails rust. Wool ropes fray under load. Every winter, the ship needs to come out of the water, get inspected plank by plank, and get repaired by the same category of skilled labor that built it in the first place. Which means you don't get to fire your shipwright after launch day. You're keeping him on retainer indefinitely, the medieval equivalent of a service contract you can never cancel. And then there's the crew. A big longship needed anywhere from 60 to 70 men to row it properly. And here's the part that should sound familiar to anyone who's ever run a business. Those men expect to get paid whether the trip goes well or not. Feeding 60 to 70 people on a voyage was its own logistical operation. Dried meat, fish, grain, ale, all of it needing to be sourced, preserved, and loaded before departure, because there was no restocking halfway across the North Sea. You are, in modern terms, running payroll and catering for a company of 70 people whose actual job is maybe come back with treasure, maybe don't come back at all. Which brings us to the actual business model, because ownership only makes financial sense if the ship eventually produces income. And the income mechanism was rating, which, and I cannot stress this enough, was not a guaranteed return. It was a gamble. You are sending 60 to 70 armed men across open water on a wooden hull held together by hand-forged nails to attack a location you may have imperfect information about, hoping to come back with more silver, goods, and captives than you spent getting there. Sometimes that worked spectacularly. Sometimes your entire crew and your entire investment went to the bottom of the sea or got cut down on a beach in Northumbria by people who were, understandably, upset about the whole situation. And even when a raid succeeded, the owner didn't just pocket the winnings, because here's the social contract nobody tells you about. If you're the jarl who financed the ship, you are expected to redistribute a huge portion of whatever you bring home. Feasts, gifts, silver handed out to your crew and your allies, this wasn't optional generosity. It was the price of keeping 60 armed men loyal enough to get back in the boat next season. Skip the redistribution and you don't just look cheap, you actively risk your men deciding you're not worth rowing for anymore, which, when your entire military and economic power is tied up in one wooden hull, is an extremely bad position to be in. Historians actually have a term for this, the ring giver tradition, the idea that a leader's legitimacy was measured by how much wealth flowed back out of his hands, not how much piled up. So walk through the full picture with me. 300 oak trees, 7,000 hand-forged nails, 2 tons of wool from 700 sheep and a year of weaving, half a mile of rope, months or years of skilled labor, annual maintenance for the life of the ship, payroll and provisions for a crew of 70, all financed by a wealthy elite or an entire coastal district working together. In exchange for the chance, not the guarantee, of a violent, high-risk payday that you were then socially obligated to immediately give away to keep your workforce from mutinying or wandering off to row for somebody else. And people did this constantly, for centuries, building fleets of these things, sometimes dozens at a time for a single campaign, which means somewhere out there, some Viking Age accountant, if such a title had existed, would have taken one look at the annual budget and just quietly walked into the fjord. Owning a longship never made financial sense. That was always the entire point.